Welcome to Titans of Transition, featuring real-life stories, anecdotes, and inspiration about pivotal career moments from leaders who have been there. Join host Joe Miller, former scientist and senior technology leader turned executive coach, as he unpacks transitional moments to help inspire change.
Hi folks, Joe here. Welcome to this special episode with my college friend George Rehberg as we recount our crazy adventure climbing up Mount Princeton. We took a long weekend to drive from Kentucky to Colorado to do this climb. I've referred to this experience in several other episodes and frequently over the years to encourage perseverance in coaching engagements. As George and I recorded this session, it's truly amazing we were able to make it to the summit, given our lack of preparation and knowledge. Listen in and hear more. Hey, George, we finally got together. Hey, listen, it's great to talk to you today. I've shared this story that you and I are going to talk about when we climbed Mount Princeton years ago on my podcast a couple times as an object lesson, and we'll talk about what that object lesson is later on, because you may have some other insights as well.
Oh, I remember.
So, hey, everybody, this is George Rehberg, a really good friend of mine from college. We both went to school at Cumberland College, it was called then, and now it's University of the Cumberlands in Williamsburg, Kentucky, in the 70s. And
Long time ago. I have retired, semi-retired into Port Charlotte, Florida, West Coast. George, where are you? I'm in Rochester, New York again. Yeah, I'm still working. I haven't retired yet.
There you go.
Yes.
Well, Barb says I'm still working too with this podcast, and she'd like me to slow down. But it's interesting. We didn't even know when we first met in school, and I don't remember exactly when that happened, but when we first met, we kind of compared notes and realized we were from the same city. I was living in Webster, New York, out on the eastern side of Rochester, and you were from East Rochester.
I'm actually in Webster now.
Oh, you're in Webster now.
That's actually where I live, is Webster now.
That's where I graduated from high school. But you were in East Rochester, weren't you?
I was in Arundequite. I grew up in Arundequite. Yeah.
So these are kind of neighboring towns. I think they're like right up against each other.
They are, yes.
Yeah. So anyway, we didn't know that right away. We both landed at the Southern Baptist College in southeastern Kentucky. Anyway, so that's the setup. That's who we are. And, we've stayed in touch now and then over the years, but I was glad to reconnect with you. And when I did, we were talking about this story. So I'd like to get into it and talk about, we were as couples, husband and wives, we, in 1975, in August, in the summer, because we stayed being married, we decided, because Barb and I met at a Young Life camp on the side of Mount Princeton. So we had this, sentimental feeling about the area, and we were talking as couples, and we said, hey, let's go out on a kind of a long weekend. Let's drive from Kentucky, a little 71 Maverick. And being young and somewhat foolish, we said, yeah, we'll do that.
We did it.
So we drove. I don't remember anything about the drive, but I do remember, this is where the story picks up. We camped kind of at the low level, floor level, leading up to Mount Princeton in this little slide next to a creek.
Yes, I remember that.
Near this area called Deer Valley Ranch. And somehow or other, we came up with the idea that we were going to hike up to the top. I think I shared that as a camper at Young Life Camp there, Frontier Ranch, we had taken a Jeep trip up to the side of Mount Princeton, Side Peak, Mount Marion. And you thought it would be cool to go up there. I thought it would be cool to go up there. So before light on this one day, took off.
It was like 5 a.m.
5 a.m. and the girls helped us. They packed us some food and water, and we headed off at 5 a.m. and it wasn't even light. We started walking up. I was familiar. The only information, this is an object lesson here, planning. So the only planning and information was what was in my head, remembering being a Young Life camper, that there was this Jeep trail road up to the side peak, and the camp counselor said to us, the campers at the time, several years before this, of course, that you could walk up to the top of Mount Princeton. You didn't need climbing gear from that side peak. And I remember where that the Jeep road was. I remember how to get from where we were camping up past Frontier Ranch and get to that road. That was it. That's the only planning we made.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, like I said, completely spontaneous, which has its pros and cons. So we did no research.
None whatsoever. You don't want to plan and live your life this way, but we were young and crazy, and thank God, youthful vigor can get you out of a hellhole. So.
But if we hadn't been that spontaneous and did it, we wouldn't be talking today.
That's probably true.
I mean, yes,
we wouldn't have this story, and I'm sure there's a lot of people out there have similar stories that you probably tell to your friends as well. But it doesn't mean planning isn't a good idea generally. So anyway, what I remember, sort of the first piece of memory I remember, is we started walking. We were not acclimated. We are okay, scientists, our hemoglobin had not adjusted to altitude. And even at that point, I think currently that is right next to any of the Coloradoans that may listen to this. That was right next to Mount Princeton Hot Springs, right across the street.
Yes.
Camp area. And so we took off, and I think it was about an hour and a half. We thought, hey, we're thirsty. And we had a little knapsack with some snacks in it. And we realized what, George?
We didn't have any water.
Why are we laughing? Because we were such great decision makers. What did we do?
We talked about going back and to get water, and we didn't. We just kept going.
Surely, we thought surely there must be water at the chalet at the top of Mount Marion.
Yeah, or someplace. We'll find water. We'll find water, which we never did. So
we never turned back, right? Now,
there was snow. Remember when we got to the peak, there was snow.
Yeah, okay.
But it was covered with bugs. Do you remember that?
Well, we didn't know that yet. So
that's correct. We didn't know that.
Hold your water, buddy. We didn't know that yet. And it was only 14,197 feet. So we were at something like 8,500 or 8,000. I think, I don't even know right now. But hey, that's not that far. And it won't take us that long.
All day. It was dark when we were coming down.
So anyway, we started walking, and again, not acclimated. And so we started hiking pretty well. A few hours in, we go past the Frontier Ranch. We go up and we found the Jeep road. We're walking, starting to get hot. It's August. We're walking, switchbacks. Jeeps are passing us. Remember that? They're going up and down, dusty, real dusty, evergreen trees, beautiful. We were talking, this is just gorgeous. What a great idea this is.
Oh, it was fantastic. I do remember at one point going around a switchback, and there was a gnarly evergreen tree there with a bald eagle sitting in it, and it didn't fly away. We walked right by it, and it just watched us. Maybe it was hungry. I don't know.
Yes, we have other animals we can talk about later on that I think we're looking at this like, you are crazy. But anyway, we walked, and we went. I don't remember what time it was, but I think it was in the middle of the afternoon, or in the afternoon, maybe 1 o'clock. when we got to Mount Marion, I don't recall. Do you remember?
Yeah, I don't remember the time either.
We got up there and we were like, holy mackerel. And I do remember having a discussion with you saying, is this far enough? Because
no, we
hadn't found water yet.
To go to the top. Right.
And we looked all around that chalet. There was no water. There's like a little.
Right. I remember looking at that. Yeah, no water.
And we thought, we've come this far. Have you ever said that, George, or anybody else? Have you ever said we've come this far? We might as well push on.
Oh, yes. Many times. And,
Now, at this point, we're above timberline. So we're looking up and there's just these scraggly little short shrubby trees right around that area. And the next step, and it was still clear, the next step was starting to walk up essentially rocks. It's not like,
yes.
And there's a trail. I think we found a trail. I'm not sure. You remember?
It might have been very short. I do remember looking at that area where, all the rocks were from the trail and just saying how rocky it is. We got up there, we discovered those were boulders. They weren't like little rocks. They were boulders.
Yeah, so there was
climbing
a small shoulder that we got up, we hiked up to and took up. Now we're starting to get pretty far out of breath every time we're doing anything, even then.
Yes.
And I remember getting over a shoulder and all you could see was sort of a ridge. And we said, well, just follow that. We could see in the distance the peak.
Right.
And so we started for the peak. And the further we went on, it seemed like the shorter in time we could go before we had to stop and rest.
Oh, gosh, yes. Yes, that was around the time where I said I was doing this and could feel no wind resistance. And it's like, wow, the air is really thin.
Is there air here?
Yeah.
And we kept going. And, this is, it's hard. There was no landmarks at that point, really. So,
right.
Some things, and this is where the object lesson starts to come in, and we'll reinforce this. You would see a peak and you would go for it, and it seemed like an hour before we would reach that.
Right.
You think, we've reached the top of Mount Princeton, and then we get up to the top of the peak, and what would we see?
Another one, another ridge.
Just as far away. And so that happened several times, probably 3 times, and we were really getting tired, and air was really thin. At that point, we went from walking to crawling.
Sort of crawling, yes.
And only going really maybe 20 yards, I remember, and being completely out of breath.
Right, and have to stop and rest. Yeah, and clearly wondering whether or not we would ever make it to the peak. But we were too close.
We had to keep going. Again, most people plan these ascents, even these sort of hiking, not very hard mountains to climb, by doing some research. Certainly today you had the internet, guys. Back then,
yes,
it wasn't really the internet. You couldn't.
No, there wasn't.
You had to buy a book, which we weren't going to do, and we didn't know which direction to go, so we were just completely going off of intuition, really. And about that point in time, we started getting some company, some little critters popped up. George, do you remember who those little guys were?
Oh, you mean you're talking about the whistle pigs?
The whistle pigs.
The marmots, but the locals called them whistle pigs.
And there were I guess they're like a rodent, right? A large rodent.
Yeah, they are. They're a rodent, right? Yeah. They're like a groundhog, except they're Western.
Yeah. And they live up there, and they skitter around in these rocks, and they're poking their heads up, kind of like a prairie dog almost, but bigger. They're poking heads up and looking at us, and they would make this whistling sound. At first we were like, what the hell is that?
They're laughing at us.
But we were glad to have company, actually, at that point in time.
Yes, they were entertaining. There's no question about it.
The other thing I remember at that point in time was something really kind of scary was starting to happen. We would go for a little bit, like we said, only a few feet, and take a rest. We got in the face, and people who've done rock climbing and mountain climbing will know what we're talking about. But the whole face of these large boulders, probably 6 to 10 feet wide, smaller ones too, but they all moved at once. Maybe
they would slide.
They would slide together like a rock slide, and maybe go for I don't know, 10 seconds, and we were on them.
Oh, it was a very frightening thing. I remember that, because it's like, if these fall and we're on them, we're gone. I mean, of course, it never happened, but we didn't know that.
No, and remember, I remember thinking, or us saying, well, whatever.
Yes.
We were so tired. We were like, so we kept pushing on. All right, so pause that whole scene. Meanwhile, back at the campsite, it's now probably 3:30.
Yes.
Something like that, 4 o'clock, 3:30 probably. And our wives are going, where are they? And they didn't take
Yes, they were
water.
Getting worried.
They didn't take their water. And they're starting to have discussions about whether or not to call out for rescue.
Oh, yes. There were no cell phones.
There were no cell phones, guys.
There were
no phone booths.
That's right.
On the hike, or even at the campsite. There was, and there was no smoke signals to be had. So, and no pre-planning to do anything. So they're probably looking up the peak at that point in time, which they could probably almost see where we were, but they could never make us out.
No, there's no way.
Anyway, so we proceed on up. We keep going, and inch by inch, step by step. And we finally made it to the top, George. And I think it was 4:30.
Yeah, it was something like that. 4:30, 5 o'clock, something like that. Yeah.
Completely wiped out and exhausted. I think we were laughing because we were such foolish people.
Do you remember
go ahead.
The size of the peak? It was not very big.
Not very big, maybe 20 yards around, or even.
That's what I was thinking. It was not very big when we got up there. And I still remember this. I mean, another thing to think about is perspective, because I remember, walking close to the edge and looking down over the valley there, and I was looking down on a plane flying across. And I've never had that experience standing on the ground.
And the clouds were even.
Yes.
Yes,
exactly.
That up because also from that point in the collegiate range, you could see past the front range in towards Kansas. It's hard to imagine that, but you could actually see Pikes Peak off to the right. We're looking east.
Right. So, yep.
You can on the northern side. There's like Mount Evans, and that's a really tall peak as well. We were at 14,197, so it's definitely a 14er. It's not by any stretch of imagination the highest 14er, but it definitely is up there. And right next to us, the collegiate range, Mount Elbert and Harvard, I think. And we could see them to the north and to the south. I remember looking to the south or west, there was another kind of landmark, which was sheer cliffs off to the other side. And we both said, glad we didn't try to come that way.
Yeah, right, exactly, yes. Yeah, because it was a huge drop.
Huge drop.
Yes.
Yeah. So anyway, we're up there, and then something else started happening about that point in time.
Yeah, thunder and lightning.
Lightning, and we could see lightning hitting those other adjoining peaks, those other neighboring peaks. And you and I looked at each other after this grueling all-day hike and thought, let's get out of here.
We have to get off the top. Yeah. We got to get out of here.
About that time, we also thought, oh gosh, the wives are going to be like really worried for us.
Yeah.
So we started our trek down. Now, you might have to help me fill in the gap here, George. I don't remember much about going off the rocks. I do remember when we were going down the roadway, but do you remember anything about getting back?
I do remember coming down. There were times when we had to sort of sit down and do like a crab thing, every now and then. Yeah, we had to do that because you just couldn't take steps going down to some places that was steep. And it wasn't so
loose.
Yes, and loose. Yes. And so we had to do that.
Yeah.
We were completely exhausted.
Yeah. Even when we were still on the rock there, we were completely exhausted.
Yes. Completely exhausted. We had to do that. And then when we got to the road or down to the timberline, because I do remember this, because a couple times it hurt. We'd be going so fast, we would literally have to grab hold of trees to slow down and stop.
Yeah, run ourselves into trees and scrape ourselves up.
Yes.
So
I remember you telling me, George, be careful, you're going to hurt yourself. And you didn't want to carry me down.
Exactly what I said. Oh, I remember that. I remember this. They used to have these toys. Disney used to make these little plastic toys that were gravity propelled. Disney walk toys. You put them on a decline and they would go like this. So we were I had no strength.
We were doing that.
And we were going faster and faster and getting out of control and running ourselves into brush and trees. And you were way out ahead of me at one point. I remember saying that to you.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So, boy, it was well after dark when we finally arrived back. We were completely exhausted and I think it was like 9 o'clock. We arrived back in camp and the girls ran up to us, and Barb pointed this out when I spoke to her about talking to you today. She goes, yeah, and you ran right into me, smashed into me, knocked me backwards. Because I was so tired, I couldn't even slow down for anything.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it was almost when we got down to the chalet.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, I can remember getting down to the chalet, but I also then had the idea of how much farther we had to go, which was a very long ways. Yeah. And it was like, I'm sitting there thinking, are we even going to be able to do this? And yet it was around that time, this guy was bringing some people up to the chalet in a Jeep. And he said to us, would you like me to give you guys a ride back on the road? And it was like, yes.
Oh, I forgot that.
Yes.
He gave us a ride?
Yeah.
Oh, thank God. We would never have made it back even the same day then.
No, we wouldn't have. You don't remember that?
I didn't remember that.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Yeah. He brought people up to the chalet.
Yeah.
Either that or, for some reason. And he asked us that. Do you want me to take you guys back? And so we got in the Jeep and he brought us back down.
Oh, I forgot that.
We would not have made it back.
Oh,
we would have had to stay somewhere and with our heads against a rock sleeping or whatever.
All right. So somewhere out there, there's a guy telling a story about these idiots.
I'm sure that's the case.
Oh, yeah. So I don't know if you're like this, George, or not, but I have told this story multiple times over the years. Just because we were crazy young. But I do remember it's probably been, at least 20 years ago when, telling people work for me, this idea came to me that, when you're on life's journey, you often think you can plot your course completely. But really, it's a zigzag course, and it's a lot like those peaks. You think you've reached your destination, but when you arrive, there's a whole other vista of the path ahead of you.
Yes, exactly. I really haven't discussed it with people like you have, but I've thought about that, and I've remembered a number of times the whole thing about the peaks. You get up and you think we're at the peak, and we're not. Right. And I've talked to family members about that before. You think we're not. But you're right. I mean, everything changes. And we look back in our lives and we see all the various
different directions our lives have taken.
Yeah.
And there's still more because our lives aren't over yet. So,
right.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah. And I think that it's a good object lesson for those points in times when we hit those peaks, those little vistas. Those are kind of moments when we take stock and we think about what our next move is. And sometimes those are, we look ahead, we have a vision, we move ahead to that point. Then we know when we reach that point, we're surprised by what we see, we have new information, and then we sort of rethink it and replot the course ahead. Sometimes it's that kind of progression. We know the next step. We're going to go to college. We worked in our job a certain period of time. Maybe we get another degree or something. Some milestone we reach, and we take stock. Other times, like today, when we're still in the middle of the pandemic, now in October of 2020, when people are having change thrust upon them. They're having transitions onto them.
Yes.
But again, it's like being at that summit and thinking, what do I do now? What's my next move?
Yeah. I mean, the other thing is they're not quitting.
They're not quitting.
Yeah. I mean, we didn't quit. And I mean, you have to sit there and think, what if we had decided at some point, let's just turn around? We'd have never made it to the peak.
Right.
We'd have never seen snow with bugs on them. I'd have never been able to look down on a plane. Look down on a plane.
Yeah, and see snow on a peak as we go over and say, well, I've done that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And by the way, side note, we didn't circle back. Yeah, there was snow up there, but it was dirty, filthy, and even in August, there was bugs in it, and we did not. I think we might have put some moisture up to our lips and found some clear spots, but
yeah, we did. That was it. But it was like we didn't want.
Would have gotten.
It was pretty dirty.
It was cold up. It was cool up there too. So next to those.
Yes, it was.
Anyway, George, do you have any other thoughts to share?
I don't know. I just come back to the idea of the spontaneity.
Yeah.
I'm probably not as spontaneous now as I was then, but I think that's just part of youth and maturity and all that. But at the same time, it's sort of like, sometimes you make a decision, you want to do something, and you have no thoughts about it whatsoever. And sometimes it's a good idea to just do that.
Yeah.
Other times it might be wise to say, let's examine it a little bit before we just jump into it. But the other thing is, if you don't do some of those things, what have you missed? What experiences do you not take with you? Take a look at this. I mean, we did this how many years ago, Joe?
Not do the math.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. Yeah, that's right. And it still affects us.
Yes.
To this day, it influences how we think and how we look at things and all that.
George, you and I had transported ourselves back to that point in time, even this a number of decades later, right?
We have. Yes, we have. I mean, just thinking about it brings it all back together.
Yeah.
And even then, it's like, well, okay, it even influences how I look at tomorrow, let's say, or whatever,
It's actually a great point, George. I mean, yeah, we've laughed about how foolish we were, but you're right. The other side, the other boundary condition here, use the math term. The other side of this is people are so afraid sometimes of taking any risk in their lives that they completely dampen the possibilities of what they can do. They won't make any moves, right? Now, we're not recommending people do things in a foolhardy way or take risks, but it'll be okay. I mean, most of the things we think about doing on a day-to-day basis aren't going to introduce this kind of level of risk. You'll be okay. And
that's right.
Something to live in your life fully, right?
Yeah, exactly. Plus, it's learning to roll with it. to roll with what you're faced with. I mean, when we got to those peaks, and then there was another one, it was like we were so exhausted, but it's like, no, let's keep going. Let's keep going. And it was phenomenal when we were up there. The one thing, though, again, like we if you remember, we got up there and we both saw on the top of the peak this mound of rocks that had obviously been placed there. People had placed it there. And I remember when we came back that we didn't do anything with the mound. We just thought it's interesting. There's a mound of rocks there. When this guy picked us up in the Jeep, he said to us, "Did you sign your name in the book?" Because Mount Princeton is listed as one of the 50 highest peaks in North America. And we said, "What book?" That's what that mound of rocks was for. Yeah. There was a book underneath it, and if you signed your name in it, they recorded that you climbed it. And I remember saying to each other, "We know we did it." Whether or not anybody else does, right. We know we did it.
That's right. They would never know George Rehberg and Joe Miller, likely anyway. But
right.
You're right. It's written in the book of our lives that we did that. So, wow,
that's a good way to put it. It's written in the book of our lives. Yes.
This has been a great time, George.
It has, man. It's been a good reminiscing on this. Wow.
Yeah, it really has. So anyway, just want to wrap up and just now I have something I can point to if I want to tell this story, where I can say, go watch this video on YouTube, and I'll
there you go.
for my future podcasts, and I won't repeat myself quite so much. But it was a strong lesson, and I'm sure, folks, if you're listening in, I'm sure you have lessons like this too, or moments that have impacted you that, life teaches us lessons that should be applied and learned from, so we don't have to repeat them maybe. But
right.
They're valuable. And sometimes, other people need to hear your stories as well, so that they can share and learn from, get sage advice from those who've gone before.
There we go. That's good.
George, thanks so much for joining me on this special episode of Titans of Transition.
Thank you. This has been great, Joe. It's been great to talk to you again, man.
Same.
We'll have to get together. By the way, do you want to do it again?
Well, we've been talking about this, folks, so stand by.
You want to climb Mount Princeton again?
We've talked about it, but I can guarantee you this time we won't do it the same way.
No.
Thanks, George.
All right. Thank you. Yep. All right. Bye.
Hey, thanks for joining me today on Titans of Transition. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Please check the show notes for additional information. Also, please like and subscribe to this channel.